My name is Renata. I'm 34 years old. And I want to be clear about something before I tell you this story. I'm not angry anymore. I was for a while. That kind of anger that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe in quiet rooms. But that passed. What's left now is something closer to clarity. So I'll tell you what happened the way I remember it, calmly, from the beginning. Because the beginning matters. I had been with Daniel for 6 years before the twins were born. We met through mutual friends. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming, unhurried, attentive, the kind of person who remembered small details about your life and brought them up weeks later. I thought that was love. I thought that was someone paying attention. We married in the 3rd year. By year 5, I was pregnant. Not planned, but not unwelcome. At least, that's what he told me. That's what he said when I showed him the test, when his face arranged itself into something that looked like happiness. I believed it then. I had no reason not to. The pregnancy was difficult. Twins carry their own complications. There were weeks of bed rest, weeks of monitoring, appointments I went to alone because Daniel was always traveling, always in a meeting, always just slightly unavailable in ways that seemed reasonable in isolation. I told myself that was just life. That's what people do, they adapt. I had the twins on a Tuesday in March. A boy and a girl. 7 weeks early, but healthy. I remember lying in that hospital bed, exhausted in a way I'd never felt before, and thinking, this is the part where everything gets easier. This is the part where he comes home. He came on the 3rd day. Not alone. She was standing slightly behind him, blonde, composed, wearing a coat that probably cost more than our first apartment. She didn't look ashamed. That was the detail that stayed with me. She looked like she had every right to be there. Daniel placed a folder on the side table next to my 4-line. He didn't sit down. He said, I think we both know this wasn't working. I remember looking at the folder. Then at him. Then at her. He said the number. $5 million. A settlement, pre-structured, already approved by his legal team. Clean. Fast. He said he only wanted the children. He said I could visit, of course. He used the word reasonable. He said everything would be reasonable. I didn't yell. I don't know why people expect that I yelled. I picked up the folder. I read every page slowly, while he stood there, while she stood slightly behind him, while the sounds of the NICU came through the wall, my children, 3 days old, in a room I wasn't yet allowed to enter unassisted. Then I signed. Every page. Every line. I handed it back without a word. He looked almost surprised. Like he had prepared for a fight and didn't know what to do with the absence of one. He left. She followed. The door closed behind them. The nurse came in an hour later. I asked her to call a specific number for me. A woman named Claire, who was listed in my phone under a name Daniel had never thought to look up. I asked her quietly. The nurse didn't ask questions. She just dialed. Claire arrived by 9 that evening. By midnight, I was no longer in that hospital. I want to say something here, because I know what you're thinking. The twins stayed. They were in the NICU. They needed monitoring. They needed the staff. They needed the equipment. I did not take them that night. I want you to understand, this was not abandonment. This was something else entirely. This was strategy. Because there is a document that Daniel had not read carefully enough. A document that his lawyers, good lawyers, expensive lawyers, had somehow failed to examine with the attention it deserved. A specific clause, buried in the settlement agreement his own team had drafted. He had been so certain I would fight the divorce that he had prepared extensively for that fight. He had not prepared for me to sign. And in that certainty, something had been overlooked. Let me explain who I am. Before I met Daniel, before I became his wife, before I became the woman who stayed home during a difficult pregnancy while he traveled, I was something else. I was a forensic financial analyst. For 8 years, I worked for a firm that specialized in corporate litigation, asset concealment, hidden accounts, shell structures. The kind of financial architecture that looks clean from the outside and falls apart the moment someone who knows what they're looking for starts pulling threads. I had left that work when we married. Daniel had encouraged it. He said we didn't need the income, that I should rest, that the work was stressful and he wanted me healthy. I had believed him. I shouldn't have believed him. Because in the 3 years since I had stopped working, I had done something quietly, privately, almost accidentally. I had noticed things. Numbers that didn't align with his stated income. Properties that appeared and disappeared from documents. A trust structured in a way that made no logical sense unless the goal was concealment. I hadn't said anything. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that was what happened when you spent years looking for fraud. You started seeing it in ordinary places. But I had kept records. Just notes, really. Dates, figures, account references, the names of entities that appeared in documents I'd seen by accident or handled without thinking. Filed quietly on an encrypted drive. Not because I planned to use them. Just because I couldn't stop myself from documenting what I saw. Here is what Daniel had not understood. The settlement he had structured, the $5 million, the custody arrangement, the clean legal departure, was built entirely on a declared asset base. His lawyers had worked from financial disclosures he had provided. They had no reason to question them. I did. And what I had, quietly stored on that encrypted drive, was the foundation of a discrepancy that no attorney could ignore once it was placed in front of them. Not a small discrepancy. The kind that, when submitted to the right people, triggers a process. An audit. A referral. A series of conversations with regulatory bodies that have no interest in what anyone wants or doesn't want. Claire, the woman I had called from the hospital, was my former colleague. Still practicing. Still with the firm. By the time Daniel arrived at the hospital the following morning, presumably to check on the twins, presumably to feel like a father, there were already calls he hadn't expected to receive. His financial advisors. His attorneys. A name he recognized from a regulatory office he had hoped never to hear from. I know all of this because Claire told me later. I wasn't there to see his face. I didn't need to be. People ask me sometimes if I planned it. If the whole thing was calculated from the moment he walked into that hospital room. The honest answer is no. I signed because I was exhausted and heartbroken, and I didn't want to fight him in a hospital bed 3 days after giving birth. I signed because some part of me had already accepted that the marriage was over and I just wanted it to stop. The rest of it came from something simpler. I had information. And when I finally allowed myself to stop pretending I didn't have it, the rest followed naturally. That's the thing about people who believe they've managed every variable. They're usually right about most of them. What they can't account for is the variable that was already there before they started managing. The information that already existed. The records that were already sitting somewhere, quiet and patient, waiting for the moment they became relevant. Daniel had spent years making sure I stayed small, stayed home, stayed out of his professional world. He just never thought to wonder what I already knew before I agreed to stay. The twins are 18 months old now. They're doing well. So am I.